In this video, I'm going to show you how to carve a Yoshi ornament. So I start out by cutting out Yoshi on a 1/2 inch piece of poplar board using my scroll saw. Carving something recognizable like Yoshi, it was really important for me to get those key details just right. So before I cut them out on the scroll saw, I put down some blue painter's tape and glued a picture of Yoshi down. So then with my X-Acto knife, I went over some of the details like the hands and the nose, the eyes. Just want to peel off this sticky painter's tape. I wouldn't lose those details when I began carving. Although it's a little bit light, you can see where I cut in some of those key details as my reference points to begin carving. So now that I'm starting to carve it, I'm using mostly a small knife and my palm tool. This is a skew. And what I'm doing is just going and finding some of the points that I know are going to be set back a little bit. So those little spikes on his back. He has like a little shell on his back. I know those things are going to be set back, so I'm going to carve those first, as well with the hand in the background. It's a little tricky because this is a pretty flat piece of wood, and I'm going for a three-dimensional effect. So I'm just taking my time and cutting in the parts of the carving that I know are going to be set back a little bit. So I think it's important to point out that when I'm doing this carving, or really any carving, I'm constantly stopping, taking measurements, and redrawing in my reference lines. It's so easy when you're carving to knock off a little piece that might have been the hand or one of those little fingers that are curled up into a fist. So that's why it's good to have that reference picture nearby, have some tools to measure, a ruler, or some calipers, and just keep making those measurements. At this point, I'm pretty much getting the right shapes that I want for Yoshi. And at this point of the carving, I always like to give it like a real rough sand just to make sure that the details are looking the way I like. So at this point, I'm carving probably the most recognizable part of Yoshi, and that's that big nose that he's got. So what I did was I found where I thought the center point of the nose was, where the nose would be sticking out the farthest. And it was a little bit tricky because this is a fairly flat piece of wood, and I'm trying to get that effect where the nose looks like it's sticking out. So finding that high point, I just take my knife and I carve away to give that nose a nice round shape. And eventually what I'll do is I go back and use some sandpaper to really make it look nice and round. So Yoshi's pretty much shaped up the way I wanted him to. So now I go through with some of my micro tools, since this is such a small carving, and get some of those details like in the eye, his fingers, and maybe parts of the tail and shell that I want to be perfect. After that, I spend a nice good amount of time going over a sandpaper. For this particular carving, I went to 220 grit to give it a nice smooth finish. So the last part of the prep work that I do before I paint was to use my wood burning tool on a real low heat, and I use the skew tip to kind of cut in some of those fine details like the eye, the back of those horns, in between the fingers. I also do for the shoes and the bottom of the shoes. And what that does is when I use my acrylic paints, I like to use a thin watered down paint, and it prevents that paint from running onto the other details. So painting a project like this is probably my favorite thing to do. I always test the paint on either another piece of wood, or in this case I use the back of the ornament, just to make sure it's the right color that I want and that it looks good on the actual wood. So as you can see, Yoshi's starting to come to life, just having this characteristic green color. And the white, I only had to go over once with this. I made this white a little bit darker because if you make it too watery, especially a light color like white, it doesn't come out as well. The red that I chose to do was I mixed a little bit of red and some orange that I eventually used for the shoes. And again, this is just a light wash. I don't like any of my carvings to be too saturated with color. I like some of the wood grain to show up through, so it's important that I water down all the paints that I use. I try to get those little details in there, like the bottoms and the yellows of the shoes. It helps them really come to life. So now that these all painted, I'm putting a finish over. This is the Howard's Feed and Wax. It's like an orange beeswax. It smells great, and I think it's a nice finish I use it actually for most of my projects. And there he is, hanging up on the old Christmas tree, ready for everyone to enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.